Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's ILTA webinar, Keep Your Windows 7 Desktops and 2008 Servers Secure and Supported After January 2020 with Citrix and Microsoft Azure. Our speakers today are Jim Morio with Cornerstone.IT and Ryan Fries with Citrix, and I want to thank Cornerstone.IT for sponsoring today's webinar. Today's presentation will run about 45 to 60 minutes, and we ask that you please submit all of your questions into the Q&A box, and if those are not answered during the presentation, they will be addressed at the end. Please know that we're recording today's session and we'll post a link to our website under recordings shortly after today's presentation. At the end, we ask that you please take a few moments to complete the evaluation. I'll now turn the webinar over to Jim.
Thank you, Marcia. And also thank you, Adriana Vitale, our marketing coordinator, who's worked very closely with with ILTA to put together this webinar. My name is Jim Morio. I'm one of the principals of Cornerstone.IT. We have also with us today Ryan Fries. He'll be the primary presenter. He's with Citrix. He's a subject matter expert, also very familiar with Microsoft. Let me just give you a little kind of background on where this webinar came from. Traditionally, Cornerstone speaks on Citrix this time of year on roadshows and webinars for ILTA, but we've been getting a number of, or I should say many requests from clients asking us what they recommend or how to get extended support for Windows 7 in 2008 because they weren't going to be able to upgrade those operating systems prior to the January 14th, 2020 end of life date. So we've sort of morphed this presentation into a Citrix Microsoft update, and that's kind of how it evolved. Ryan again will do most of the speaking. There's a couple of polling questions we'll bring up, but primarily we're going to chat about what your options are. So there's the agenda. What can you do to get support, whether it's buying the extended support, moving to Azure, or upgrading. We'll talk a little bit about Microsoft's new virtual desktops on Azure. This is something that's been in the works for literally years, and now Microsoft, I want to say about a month ago, made it generally available up on Azure. And we'll talk a little bit also about Citrix's cloud services and Citrix's managed desktop. I'll be monitoring the Q&A, so as questions come up in the questions and answers chat there, not the chat, I should say, the questions and answers window, I'll ask them as they're appropriate to Ryan as we're going through that. And with that, Ryan, I'll hand it over to you. Actually, I'm sorry, there'll be a polling question right up first, and then I'll hand it over to Ryan. So quick question is, what are you guys running today? So if you're running Windows 10, what build? Is it 1709, 1803, 1809, 1903? Or are you running Windows 7? Or maybe you're running something other than Windows 7 or Windows 10. So if you could just check one of those boxes, that'll help us understand the audience and see what everybody's running. I'm assuming no one's on 1909 because that came out about a week ago. Okay, so there's still a fair amount of you on Windows 7. Okay, then that's not unusual. I think the ILTA survey that came out 2 weeks ago showed maybe not as high as 33%, but a fair amount of folks that are still on Windows 7. So good, very timely. Okay, with that, I will hand it over to Ryan. Ryan, all yours.
Yep, thanks, Jim. So it is interesting to see what percentage of you are on Windows 7 today. I'm sure most of you are aware, but Windows 7 is going end of support January 14th, 2020. But really, what does this mean for you? And it means that you're really going on end of support for your Windows 7 endpoints as well as your 2008 servers. So as I use Windows 7 as we're going throughout, just note that I'm also correlating that to the matching server operating system, right? But from a security perspective, this means you're getting no additional security patches, which means you have a massive security risk. There are bad guys out there that are waiting for Windows 7 to go end of life to potentially breach your network. And of course, from an operating system bug perspective, we all know Microsoft has bugs in their software all the time. You're not going to get those OS bugs. So now that we know what that means for us, what are your options? And luckily, if you're not ready to migrate over to Windows 10, you do have other options available to you, right? So the first one I want to highlight is you can get Windows 7 extended security updates. And we gave an example of a 300-person firm for what that would cost from a ballpark perspective. Of course, um, with a higher number of licenses, you may be able to work with your Microsoft rep to negotiate these rates. But for the very first year for Windows 7, we're looking at around $25 a device. So of course, if you had a 300-person firm times 25, we're looking at around $7,500. The second year it doubles, and then the third year it doubles again. And after that third year, Microsoft is saying, hey, we're not going to support Windows 7 anymore. The other option is you can move your Windows 7 over to Azure. So essentially, you're literally taking your endpoint operating system and you're going to run that image, that Windows 7 device in Azure, and you have to deliver that to your users one way or another. So that kind of begs the question, well, that sounds great, Ryan. I can move that over to Azure. I'm getting all the security updates and OS bugs for free, but what do I do about my endpoint? How do I configure it in a way that it's secure and my users can easily access that desktop operating system that's now being consumed and ran in Azure? And there are a lot of solutions out there that'll help you with just that. You can potentially convert your endpoints over to a thin client. There's different vendors like an iGel where you plug in a thumb drive, it boots from the iGel OS from that thumb drive, and it's pre-configured to automatically connect to that desktop running in Azure. So you do have those capabilities. Or of course, you could actually just lock down your machine as much as possible with GPOs, logon scripts, you name it. The third option is you can switch over to Windows Virtual Desktop. So this is a Windows 10 desktop that's running in Azure, or you can use Citrix Managed Desktops, which is Citrix's version of Windows Virtual Desktop with all the bells and whistles that Citrix offers. One thing I want to highlight with Windows Virtual Desktop is this was just publicly available around a month ago. So it's a fairly new technology, and it's a very first multi-session desktop operating system from Microsoft, and it's only available in Azure. And
I was just to add to that, Ryan. Yeah.
Sure.
So let me just underline what Ryan just said. So it's a multi-session version of Windows 10. So similar to remote desktop services, terminal server, Citrix's Zen app. Now Microsoft's enabled that multi-user capability in the Windows 10 operating system. So one OS running multiple users.
Yep, thanks, Jim. And your final option, which I think is the most obvious option, which for those that are not on Windows 7 is probably what you did. And that's just upgrade your actual endpoints in your server to Windows 10 and Server 2016. Or if you're really ambitious, you can upgrade that to Server 2019. And I believe we have a poll question here.
Yeah. So just to get a quick understanding of, do you have any Windows 2008 servers in production? I suspect that most of you will say yes. And then second question is, do you currently have a Microsoft Azure account? So that doesn't, the Azure account, whether you're using it for production or development, or maybe you have an account and not even using it, just if you could answer those yes or no, that'd be great. Okay, so as expected, 93% of you have a Windows 2008 server running, and so almost 2/3 of you have an Azure account, which is great because that makes it that much easier for you to do what Ryan is about to describe.
Yep, and I want to add, I mentioned the Windows 7 pricing, but I didn't mention the Windows 2008 pricing. I wasn't able to find the exact pricing from Microsoft, so chances are you have to work with your Microsoft rep in order to identify what that the extended security updates would cost for your organization. But I'm sure they're more than willing to work with you if you're not ready to migrate or upgrade to a later operating system. With that being said, it's great to see how many of you are already looking at Azure. and at least exploring those options. Because when we talk about moving workloads over to Azure, it's really not as difficult as it sounds. There's definitely a big learning curve, but I like to say if I can set up my own Azure instance and do a migration through my own home lab, it must not be that complicated. And that's because Microsoft gives you a lot of tools that helps you through that migration process. And the first one I want to talk about is the Azure Migrate tool. So this is an appliance that you actually import into your hypervisor. So if you're running VMware today, you have an OVF appliance, you put that onto your actual server. And what it's going to do is it's actually going to discover everything that's running in your environment. So all of the VMs, you can filter through those VMs as you choose to, and it'll do an assessment based on what you actually search for within that filter. So the assessment will tell you if those VMs are ready to be migrated over to Azure. So essentially you get a report with green check marks and red X's. And if you see any red X's, Microsoft will give you steps of how to prepare those VMs so they are ready to migrate over to Azure. Not only that, but you're also going to get a cost estimator for compute and storage based on the history of the VM. So you will get some cost metrics, some ideas around what that will take to run in Azure. And it'll also give you a VM sizing recommendation, because we all know there's different instances in Azure. So it'll give you recommendation based on, again, the history of the VM on premise. The second tool is the Azure Site Recovery tool. And this tool was built for site recovery in Azure, but it also became a great tool for that migration process. And essentially what this does is it's, again, an appliance you import into your on-prem environment. It's going to set up your target environment in Azure. It's going to prepare all of your VMs on premise for replication. It'll then replicate your VMs. Then you want to test them, of course, and then we'll eventually switch those over to production. So long story short is there are tools from Microsoft to make this potentially painful process less painful, to make it easier for all of you that are exploring the Azure route.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, there's also plenty of Microsoft videos. If you YouTube search migrating 2008 to Azure, Microsoft has some pretty well documented videos or pretty well made videos that walk you through the process.
So I want to spend a little bit more time just talking about Windows Virtual Desktop, because this is a brand new technology. And I want to re-emphasize that this is a only multi-session Windows 10 desktop available from Microsoft. So when I say multi-session, again, if any of you were Citrix customers in the past or even Horizon customers in the past, you knew the only way to get a multi-session experience when we talk about virtualization is with a server operating system. So in that case, we have, let's say, a Windows 28 or 2008 or 2012, we skin it to look like a desktop operating system. So we get the capabilities of being able to share that CPU, that RAM, and that storage in the back end. So we have higher scalability and less VMs to manage. The problem with that historically is if you're running any applications that aren't compatible with the server operating system, you're out of luck. You couldn't get that multi-session experience because your AutoCAD application wouldn't run on a 2008 server. Now with Windows 10 being multi-session, you get the best of the desktop operating system experience. So those applications that you're using in-house that were built for a desktop OS can be ran in that format, and you still get the experience of the scalability of being able to utilize and share that CPU, that RAM, and that storage in the back end. So really, really interesting that Microsoft developed their new desktop operating system this way. And they also announce, which is another interesting conversation, that they're going to completely get rid of the multi-session capabilities in their future server operating systems. This basically means in the future, you're going to have to utilize Windows 10 and Azure if you want that type of capability. So if you're an RDS customer today, well, that's going to eventually go away. You're going to have to utilize Windows 10 for that multi-session connection. Of course, from a Windows Virtual Desktop perspective, there are a lot of built-in optimizations with Office 365. So if you utilize Office 365 today and you use, let's say, Teams and Outlook and you name it, there are built-in optimizations for that software suite. I will say there are some limitations today just because Windows Virtual Desktop's so new. So for example, if you use Skype or Teams, and you want to use the audio and video capabilities in Windows Virtual Desktop, you're not going to get a really great experience. The audio will be choppy. Video, I don't even think works. But if you do pair Windows Virtual Desktop with a solution like Citrix, and you get the actual optimization packs for those software, you will get those capabilities. So there are some workarounds while Microsoft continues to develop and make their Windows Virtual Desktop better. And of course, there's direct migration steps from RDS over to WVD running in Azure. And then from a scalability and deployment perspective, that's the whole idea of Azure is it's supposed to be easy. You should be able to scale down and scale up as you need. So if you have seasonal workers, no problem. You just run those VMs for the time you need them and then just delete them when you don't need them. So from a scalability perspective, it's a great use case. So this is also fairly interesting. For any of you that are familiar with FSLogix, this is now available in Windows Virtual Desktop, absolutely free of charge. So Microsoft actually acquired FSLogix in order to have their capabilities built into their platform. So things such as profile containers, so being able to manage profiles and replace roaming profiles in folder redirection. Application masking, so for any of those who are joining us today that are more tech focused, that have managed images in the past, application masking makes image management a heck of a lot easier because now we can hide certain applications from different user groups. So I only need one master image, and if I don't want my HR department to see my IT applications on that image, I can mask those applications from my HR department. And same with Java redirection. I can have multiple versions of Java on the same image and use that version of Java depending on the application dependency.
I think I'll add to that. Probably one of the more popular uses of FSLogix is the management of the cache mode of Outlook in a remote desktop session or Citrix session, where it takes the OST file, the cache mode of Outlook, and puts it into a share that is not part of the roaming profile of the users. So that if you have a 6 gig, 10 gig mailbox when you log on and off of a remote desktop Citrix session, it doesn't copy up and copy down. It's probably one of the more popular uses of FSLogix.
And this one is kind of more of like a Microsoft marketing type slide, but I think it does speak volumes when we have this conversation around Azure, in that Azure's their global network is across the board. It's global. There's 54 Azure regions. And what's really unique about Microsoft's global network is it's consistently monitoring where users are connecting from. The way I like to explain it is if all of a sudden they see a boom of users connecting from, I don't know, Boise, Idaho, maybe they see that incoming traffic and they're going to create a new entry point from that location because they want to ensure that those group of users have the best user experience possible. It's kind of a double-edged sword though, because when we talk about cloud consumption, especially when it comes to the public cloud, well, now we have to even be more concerned about how our network is set up. For example, if I'm a law firm and I have multiple locations and I'm backhauling all of my traffic to my main location and then sending users out to Microsoft's global network, Well, now Microsoft is seeing that all of that traffic is coming from your main location. So it's actually going to move the data and the resources away from the user potentially to that main location. So we have to set up our network topology. So as soon as a user connects to Microsoft's cloud application, so like the Office 365 apps, that they go directly to Microsoft's global network. And that's just following Microsoft's connectivity principles. So it's definitely something that we have to consider that should be top of mind as we are consuming cloud-based applications, especially through Microsoft.
I think we have a survey. Thank you very much, Marsha. Is to kind of gauge who's using Citrix today. Are you currently running Citrix Zen app or Zen desktop, or as it's currently named, virtual apps and desktop? For those of you who like to keep track of Citrix's marketing changes, are you currently running Citrix Zen app, Zen desktop, virtual apps, virtual desktops? Great. Okay, so about 2/3 of you are currently running Citrix. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's great to hear that a lot of you are Citrix customers. We're going to change gears a little bit and spend some time talking about how Citrix empowers Windows Virtual Desktop. Kind of similar to if you're familiar with RDS for XenApp, there are some capabilities that Citrix enhances when it comes to that RDS protocol. And the same is true when we talk about Windows Virtual Desktop running in Azure, right? And not only that, but there are a few things we will go through that you may be able to take use of as an on-prem Citrix customer if you're not ready to move over to the cloud. So we'll touch upon that as well, and I'll show a couple little demos so you can see some of those value add capabilities that Citrix came out with. So there's a lot on this slide here, but these are some of the pieces to the puzzle that make that Windows Virtual Desktop experience even better. So things such as auto scale capability. So when we talk about cloud consumption, now cost is even more top of mind because we're paying for the consumption of that CPU, of that RAM, and of course, storage is always there. So that's kind of more of a constant factor when we talk about storage. But when it comes to the CPU and RAM, we want to make sure that we're only utilizing that desktop or that server OS when we need to. Otherwise, we want to power it off for the rest of the other time to keep our costs down. You can do that today within Microsoft, but it's not easy. You have to do a lot of PowerShell scripting, CLI type stuff in order to set up a schedule. With Citrix and their auto scale capability, it's built into the GUI, so it's a nice UI where you can set up exactly when you want to turn those desktops on, when you want to turn them off. You can do it by usage, by load. So that's a great value add to Windows Virtual Desktop. If we move to the next one, right to the right of autoscale, of course, Citrix HDX technology, which is now their new protocol, kind of like an upgrade to ICA for those who have been running Citrix for a while. You do get the best of the HDX protocol with Windows Virtual Desktop if you pair Citrix with Microsoft. So if you need a high definition user experience, if you're working with any type of videos or any type of video editing content, image editing content, you do have those capabilities. I touched upon the optimization packs for Teams and Skype. That's the only way to get the video and audio to work in a reasonable way in Windows Virtual Desktop today. And of course, there are security capabilities around it, such as session recording, security analytics, multi-factor authentication via something other than Microsoft's authentication, their second factor. So just know it is a value add to Windows Virtual Desktop is a takeaway here. And a lot of these are going to look like repeats. I guess because some of them are, but I do want to highlight a couple here. So image management is always a big deal when we talk about VDI and virtualization, and you will get the MCS, the machine creation services capability of Citrix with Windows Virtual Desktop by pairing them together. And I believe the rest here I talked upon. The workspace intelligence, I'll actually show a demo of what that looks like. It's a great value add to Windows Virtual Desktop, but it's also a great standalone solution that may help you with your other applications that you've already invested in. So there's 3 new offerings from Citrix. So Citrix has been making a major investment into their cloud stack. The reason being is because a lot of applications today, they're now being consumed in a software as a service type model. So Citrix wanted to offer their great technology as a service model as well. So you'll see a lot of new releases for Citrix on the cloud side, but not a whole lot of updates on the on-prem side. And the first one I want to touch upon is the Citrix Managed Desktop offering. This is their new desktop as a service solution. It was actually just released, I think like a couple weeks ago, so brand new solution. And this is basically Citrix managing everything for you. So if you're a Zen app or a Zen desktop customer today, you have things on premise like your storefront server, your SQL database, your license server, your delivery controller. Citrix is saying, hey, we're going to manage all of those for you. We'll ensure you have 99.99% high availability, and we'll always make sure you're up to date on the latest and greatest, or at least on the LTSR version of the software, the long-term service release. What we're also going to do in the desktop as a service offering model is we're also going to manage that Windows Virtual Desktop for you. So that's hosted by us. So it's a one SKU solution. You just pay Citrix, and they're going to manage all the supporting infrastructure as well as the desktop. The second offering, which is the one in the middle there, this is Citrix Virtual Apps and Virtual Desktops as a service. So think of it as Zen App and Zen Desktop as a service. So it's essentially the same thing as a Citrix Managed Desktop, but you as the customer decide where you want your workloads to live. Do you want your virtual desktops to be on premise? Do you want them to be in your own public cloud? So bring your own Azure, bring your own AWS. You manage your applications and you manage your desktops, and Citrix will manage all the supporting infrastructure. And then lastly, the third option is Citrix Workspace. This kind of falls outside of the umbrella of virtualization, but pairs very nicely. The way I like to explain Workspace is it's very similar to, if any of you are familiar with ADFS, Okta, or Ping, it's a single sign-on type portal with added capabilities. And I'll touch upon what those capabilities are when I walk through a quick demo. So from a Citrix Managed Desktop perspective, I touch upon most of these when we talked about Windows Virtual Desktop. Again, the desktop as a service solution through Citrix is still utilizing Windows Virtual Desktop, but you're getting the management components of Citrix. However, with Citrix Managed Desktops, it's the first time the desktop can be domain joined or non-domain joined. So if you have a use case where you need to give desktops to, let's say, some type of contractor within your organization, you don't even have to create them an AD account anymore. You can give them access to a non-domain joined desktop so they can start their work day one. So it is a very specific use case, but it is a use case that we do see out in the market. And from like a network connectivity perspective, it is an easier way to simplify network connectivity because you just walk through a nice GUI that Citrix gives you. So you can set up everything right through Citrix Managed Desktops. And again, it's the first time you could buy everything from Citrix. Behind the scenes of all of these products is Citrix Analytics. And I think rather than spending the time talking about all these different pieces, let's jump into a quick demo.
Yeah, I'll just add to this while you're setting up that demo. One of the things Citrix has been doing a great job was kind of adding on to their tools with features that monitor performance and security. Some of these that Ryan's going to show you are products that you get today with your Citrix Zen app or Zen desktop licenses. So if you're on-prem, you could, if you upgrade to the latest version, will get some of these features. And then some of it, I think, around the security side is more based on the cloud product. So back to you, Ryan.
Yep, so the security analytics that I'm about to show, this is only available through the cloud platform. But when I jump into the performance analytics, if you're on the LTSR version of Citrix, all you need to do is upgrade your director servers to the latest version, and you can make use of the performance analytics free of cost. So jumping to the security analytics. So again, this is an analytics platform that's ran in Citrix Cloud. So you view this through Citrix's management console. And the way it works is it's categorizing users based on a red, amber, and green scale. So of course, your red users are going to be high risk users from a security perspective. Your medium risk users, of course, will be medium risk. And then we're not concerned with the low risk users. So from a security perspective, if I'm somebody in IT, I can be more proactive than reactive when it comes to security within my Citrix environment. So for example, I can look at those riskier users and see why they're considered a high risk user. As an IT administrator, I can even pre-set up policies to identify what I consider high risk to my organization. But in this case, you can see that all of a sudden, Georgina here got a plus 26 to her score. And that's because she had some unusual logon access 9 different times. So this might be failed username and password. This could be she's connecting from one place, like South Florida, like where I'm located. And then 2 hours later, she's connecting from somewhere in Europe. That's definitely not possible. So let's up her risk score and send somebody from IT a notification that our environment somehow was breached. Other options, attempted to access a blacklisted URL. So URL filtering, they're trying to connect from an unmanaged device. A big one I know for a lot of you will be your content. So let's say somebody all of a sudden downloads 500 gigs or 500 megs to 1 gig worth of data. Again, let's kick the user out. Let's send IT a notification that this is just risky behavior to our organization and it looks like we were breached. So some really cool stuff when it comes from a security perspective and in the analytics platform alone. So if we jump over to performance, it's going to be a similar scale. So you still have the red, amber, green as far as the performance of the users go. And again, this is a more proactive way to monitor user performance. So rather than waiting for somebody to call IT and say, hey, it's taking me like 3 minutes to log in to my Citrix environment, we can have somebody go in and look at all the poor users and see why they're having a poor user experience when it comes to Citrix. Maybe it's taking them a long time to load. And if so, we can actually dig in deeper and see exactly what's taking a while for them to load when they make that initial logon. Is it GPOs? Is it their profile being too large? Do they have a brokering issue? Is it the connection? Is it the authentication? So it's taking a long time when they log in with Duo as my secondary authentication factor. So you can dig in deeper to see exactly what's causing that. Same with session responsiveness. We can identify the different latency. So is there a data center latency? Is there WAN latency or host delay? And then session reliability. Is there a lot of failures within the environment? Is the user having to reconnect all the time because their machine continues to fail? If so, we can actually look at that before the user comes in and is complaining that Citrix isn't working.
Yeah, probably the most popular use case is the attorney working from a remote office or maybe their vacation home or whatever and complaining of a poor performance. Instead of the IT staff kind of scrambling and looking at VMware and all these other underlying infrastructure, they have a very good dashboard right here to kind of identify why that particular user is having a poor performance. And it's easier to show, hey, it's not the system, it's your Wi-Fi connection or your latency. It's a very good tool for addressing some of those users who may be thinking it's a system and it's not.
Yep, and I want to reemphasize again, if you're an on-premise Citrix customer, you can make use of the performance analytics available as a Citrix Cloud service by upgrading your director server, which is your monitoring server, to the latest version. So you can make use of these capabilities today, absolutely free of cost. From a user experience score, the way it works is it takes the latency, the logon duration, the failures, and the reconnections, and it gives a benchmark based on those different factors. So you can see from a poor experience, we can see degradation in performance, logon lags, et cetera, et cetera. Fair has other performance degradation, but maybe only for a smaller period of time. So just know there are different ways of scoring the user experience. From a security analytics perspective, I walked through the user analytics, but there's also application security analytics, and we can protect applications from external attacks. We can actually rank applications based on risk. So if you're using any type of homegrown application, we can see if that application is a potential threat, that somebody outside is trying to attack that specific application, and we can suggest mitigation steps in order to enhance security for specific applications. And of course, from a data security perspective, we can actually track sensitive files if you pair the solution with a DLP engine. So if you have something that's high risk with a lot of sensitive information in it, we can actually see where that information is being stored, if it's being shared, if it's being downloaded. So some cool stuff there. And the way it works is it's taking the different entry points from Citrix. So it's taking the different services, the virtual apps, the gateway, endpoint management, content collaboration, and it's looking at all that type of data that's coming through depending on what services you're utilizing as a customer. And even the other field there, the reason it's showing others because Citrix is working with Microsoft to create direct API connections to different Microsoft services as well. So we can get risk indicators directly from Microsoft for some of their services. All right, so we're gonna shift gears a little bit and we're gonna talk about experience. And I think this is a great segue to that experience conversation because this is something a lot of us can relate to. I mean, how many of us have walked up to one of these fancy copiers slash scanners slash printers and just looked at all these different buttons and said, well, what do I do? All I want to do is actually make a copy. And software is kind of like that. Most software, especially enterprise grade software, was built for that 1%, that power user that needs all of these bells and whistles. But for the 99% of us, we just want to push that big green button and make a copy. So when we talk about applications, most of us just use one piece of an application. We don't use every little piece of that. And even when we talk about the consumer world today with our mobile devices, we're used to getting a notification. And within that notification, we have an action. So we click it, it brings up our application, and it tells us exactly what we need to do. And it kind of goes to show you that if we look at enterprise software today, parts of it really have failed employees. We have a kind of best in the grade applications, but because they have all these bells and whistles, it makes it a little bit confusing from an employee perspective. It's just we have a lot of applications, we have too little usage of a lot of those applications, and we're consistently switching back and forth. I mean, the average person uses between 7 to 12 applications in a single day just to get your job done. And on average, every 2 minutes, some of us are interrupted by some type of email, text message, which is forcing us to switch back and forth between all of these applications. And studies have shown that it takes around 20 minutes to get back into what you're doing when you are interrupted with that email, with that text message. So through Citrix, we really do think there is a better way. And that's where this idea of the workspace comes from. So we're going to be talking a lot about the workspace intelligent experience. Essentially what Citrix did is they acquired this company called Sappho. And this company named Sappho, essentially what they thought is, hey, consumers today, they're used to that notification on their phone and doing a specific task within their application on their mobile device. Why not do that in the workplace? And that's what they created. So now through this workspace intelligent experience, we can get various notifications from all of our enterprise grade applications and see them in a single feed, like as if you're on Facebook, and perform your different tasks based on those different activity feeds that are coming in. And the goal of this is to give employees about a day a week back. So essentially that's 20% productivity. And it's a bold claim, but studies have shown that around 20% of us, or around 20% of our week rather, is spent just finding content. So if we can make that even a little bit easier, maybe even 10% better, we're improving our overall employees' productivity. And I want to quickly jump over to another demo here. And I always like to see things. I mean, I'm a techie, so I think seeing it makes more sense. So here's an example of what the intelligent workspace experience would look like. So from a user perspective, let's take the life of a paralegal. If I come in at 8 a.m. every morning, first thing I'm going to do is I'm either going to access my Citrix Workspace app, which is a native app installed on the computer. You can set it up to single sign on the user automatically, or if you want added security, you can require them to enter 2 factors of authentication. And when they do that, either from their native app or web browser, they're brought to this page here. And on this page, you can see right in the middle, they have something called their activity field. This is essentially a bunch of notifications from all the enterprise applications that they have access to. So you can see a notification from iManage that a document was shared with you. I can say, okay, that's great. Close that. You can see somebody under you is asking for you to approve their timesheet. You can look at the information about that timesheet without actually having to go to the application in order to view that information. So you can say, oh yeah, this looks great, or this doesn't look good. You can either send it back or go ahead and approve it. So you can interact with all of your enterprise applications right through a single portal. Not only that, but you can create actions to all of those applications. So if you need to request PTO, through Workday, you can absolutely do that from the Workspace portal. If I want to book a room because I have a client coming in a few hours, you can do that from here. Same with starting a meeting through Zoom or a GoToMeeting or WebEx or really you name it. And in the worst case, if you do need to go directly to that application, no problem. You can still go to the Apps tab here. You can see all of your applications, whether these are web apps or Citrix virtual apps. So you can display both, and you can still click any of these and it will single sign on into them automatically. So you don't have to re-authenticate as a user. And the same is true for your desktops as well. And of course, the last piece of the puzzle, because we do want to make this a workspace that users never have to leave, is your content, is your files. If you're a Citrix ShareFile customer, you can see all of your content here as well. And you can create different connections to all of your different file repositories in your organization. So if you utilize Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, you can create connections so all of those are shown here. Even your network shares can be available right through your workspace.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Ryan. You could also, there's an API for the workspace. So if let's say your document management system is iManage, there's an API where you could show your recent matters or your recent documents in that bar area over there. So it's a lot of capabilities into what Ryan was saying. It's really trying to make end users more productive by not having to require them to click into the application to get to a particular feature or functionality. It brings it front and center.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to mention here very quickly is it's not as obvious, but there is a lot of artificial intelligence / machine learning capabilities behind the scenes of the workspace. So that example of, let's say I log in at 8 a.m. every morning and I always launch the same document, the same Excel spreadsheet, it's going to actually suggest that piece of content to me as a user. So it'll actually monitor how a user is working on a day-to-day basis and suggest content to try to make them more productive. So some really cool stuff. A lot of these features actually aren't publicly available yet. It will be available in Q4. So if this does interest anyone, of course, there's a lot of videos out there so you can take a deeper look and see what it looks like from that user perspective. All right, so jumping gears, let's talk a little bit more about security, because security is often top of mind for most of us. And we touched upon the Citrix analytics for security. And I do want to highlight a couple things here through these screenshots. So again, I walked through a demo of this, but we can be notified for certain pieces of activity, such as unusual logon access, unusual file transfers. But this is really the slide I wanted to show. Is here's all the different policies that we can set up as an administrator for security. So again, you can be very flexible on how you want to set up your security posture when it comes to your users logging in via Citrix. There are some other security capabilities built into the platform. So here's an example of the old workspace. So you can see the portal looks a little bit different, but it gives you an idea of what the security looks like. So let's say I launch one of my web applications. In this case, it's Salesforce. When that application is actually launched, we can do some cool things such as watermarking it. So you can see exactly who's connected to it, the IP address that that user connected from. So if somebody took a screenshot of this or took a picture with their phone, you can trace back exactly where that picture came from. We can prevent clipboard redirection. So if we don't want somebody to be able to copy and paste, we can make sure that that's not allowed. If somebody does access a URL that we don't allow within the organization, we could do a lot of URL filtering so we can make sure that that access is restricted. And then lastly, if we want users to access certain applications that we deem riskier to the organization, let's say we have somebody from marketing that needs access to Instagram, rather than launching that application on a local browser, we can launch it on a Citrix managed browser. Essentially what that means is if that person downloaded anything that's potentially malicious to that organization, we don't care because it's not running locally. As soon as the user logs off, Citrix is just going to wipe that session completely. So it keeps your environment a little bit more safer when connecting to those riskier applications.
Yeah, let me underline that again. That's there's plenty of firms out there that prevent attorneys access to Facebook and Gmail. This is one method of allowing them to access those websites without compromising your firm.
And then last thing I want to touch upon very quickly when it comes to security is there is anti-keystroke logging, so keylog malware prevention, as well as screenshot capture prevention built into the platform. So again, similar example, if I'm running in Salesforce, you can see on the left there that there's a keylogger application running in the background. So that could be a piece of malware and it's copying exactly what the user's typing. Same with screenshot. If I use a snippet tool, I can take a screenshot of this browser. There are pieces of malware out there that just constantly take pictures of your screen. If we have these enhanced security capabilities enabled and we do the same function, they're just going to get a bunch of gibberish when it comes to the keylogger software. And if you do try to take a screenshot, you're just going to see a gray box. So some great added security capabilities that's built into the actual platform behind the scenes. And then lastly, let's talk about choice. So for those who are existing Citrix customers, I'm sure you're well aware that Citrix has always been very flexible as far as where their software lives. In other words, it'll work on VMware's hypervisor, on Hyper-V, Citrix hypervisor, Acropolis via Nutanix. And the same is true with clouds. So when we talk about this world of public cloud, you don't want to be locked into a specific vendor like an Azure, an AWS, or a Google Cloud. You want to have that flexibility of being able to switch between the different vendors. And the main reason would be for cost, right? If you're an Azure customer and then they just say, hey, I'm going to raise your prices by 30%, you want to say, okay, well, then I'm going to give AWS my business and I'm going to switch over all of my workloads over to AWS. So just note that Citrix was built to have the flexibility in mind, so you're not locked into a specific vendor to where your actual resources live.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A window. We've got about 10 minutes to answer some of those questions. There's a valuation that Marcia just put up. Thank you very much. Please fill it out. That's important for ILTA so that we can, we and the ILTA members and partners could present interesting and relevant information to the membership. So please fill that out. I'll spend a minute or two just kind of summarizing for those of you who want to add any questions. On the Windows 7 and 2008 environment, Ryan showed that there's a quick way to migrate the 2008 servers to Azure. On the Windows 7 side, similarly, if you want to, you could migrate Windows 7 to Azure. You could also use tools like the iGel thumb drive that he mentioned, which will turn a Windows 7 machine into essentially a thin client, and you could boot into, let's say, a Citrix Zen app or Zen desktop environment. And then after that, Microsoft announced the multi-session of Windows 10. So you could run multiple users running one Windows 10 operating system up in Azure. And then on the Citrix side, Citrix offering the Citrix Cloud. So if you want to move your infrastructure, your Citrix infrastructure to the cloud while still having the servers and desktops on-prem, if you wanted to have Citrix manage your desktop, that Citrix is managed desktop. And then lastly, that workspace product, which is pretty interesting, pretty new, having your attorneys and users go to web interface to do most, if not all, of their email, document management, day-to-day functionality without having to switch between apps and too many clicks. So I don't see any questions there, but I do appreciate everybody joining. We had a good crowd. We had a good crowd listening. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to email myself, jim.morio@cornerstone.it, or if you want to call me, that's my number, 646-530-8920. With that, I'll give it back to you, Marcia.
Thank you so much, Jim and Ryan, for the great presentation, and Cornerstone.IT for sponsoring. And members, you can see the evaluations up on your screen, so please do take a moment to complete. The session has been recorded, and we'll post the recording to our website within a day or two, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you all.